The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. Do you have any of those childhood memories that just seemed off? Those visions of the past that are so fragmented and vague, it almost seems like your brain doesn't want you pulling back the veil, doesn't want you to truly remember. Childhood is a scary time, after all. Adults shepherd you around a confusing world, giving you commands you must obey without understanding. And while they may smile and tell you everything is okay, deep down, you had this innate knowledge that they were lying, some abstract conviction that there was a darkness to this world your brain was not yet ready to understand. Like watching cartoons while hearing your parents scream at each other in another room, or making sandcastles on the shore of the ocean, trying to ignore the primal feeling that something is watching you from the abyssal depths. I have a memory like that, and while everyone I knew, my sister, my parents, hell, even my therapist, has tried to tell me it's not real, that man never existed, that an entire weekend of my life never happened, that it was all the product of false memories and an overactive imagination, I know, with every fabric of my being, that they're wrong. Uncle Teddy is real. He started off as a family in-joke. Every time us kids were bad, we'd be threatened with a visit to old Uncle Teddy's, as if it were the worst punishment imaginable. Maybe we'll spend a weekend at Uncle Teddy's, my father would say whenever we argued, and see what he has to say on the matter. They made a point of never explaining who this Uncle Teddy even was, or why he was supposedly so scary. That alone made it more effective than any specific threat could ever be. I used to love letting my imagination fill in the gaps. Like the little brat I was, I'd come up with stories to scare my little sister, Kathy, half to death. Uncle Teddy is a child eater, I'd tell her, and when you're sent to his house, he cooks you up and makes you into meatloaf. And then she'd cry, and I'd get grounded. Then came that sunny June day, when I was looking forward to my last summer break before the looming specter that was middle school. Imagine my reaction when my mother told us that, this time, genuinely and sincerely, we were going to Uncle Teddy's. I wanted to ask if she was joking, but there wasn't the slightest levity in her eyes. Her soft smile was clearly forced, maybe to keep me calm, or perhaps to calm herself. "Don't worry, this is not a punishment," she said. "I think we're all going to have a great weekend." Naturally, Kathy absolutely lost her mind. She went into a full tantrum, and my parents had to tediously undo all the damage I'd done over years of fibs and tall tales. Even I was a little nervous. I stayed awake that night, imagining the view from inside a microwave, slowly spinning round and round. My father dragged me out of bed at 5 o'clock that morning, down to the old docks. It wasn't anything new. Fishing was our tradition, the way we bonded, but that day his heart wasn't in it. We didn't even speak more than a couple words. He just stared at me with a quiet agony in his eyes, like there was something he was desperate to say but couldn't. As our John boat lazily pierced the early morning fog, by the time we made it back, my bags were already packed. Our mother drove us for hours, as far from civilization as you can imagine. Every time I thought the road couldn't possibly get any more rural, more narrow, more pockmarked and washed out, I was proven wrong again and again, until what we were driving on couldn't be called roads, but seemed more like wild trails through untamed forest, until at last, the brush cleared all at once, and we reached an old wooden-covered bridge and a colourful sign reading, "Welcome to Weathersby Island." As it turned out, Uncle Teddy was nothing like I'd pictured. I'd always had a fear of Marilyn Manson as a kid after seeing him on the cover of a magazine, and that was how I imagined Teddy: dark, brooding, skinny, pale. In truth, He was a barrel of a man, muscular but big-bellied, with a full bushy beard. He swept me and Kathy up in his arms and hugged us so hard I felt I might pop. "Your folks have told me so much about you kids," he said with a big grin, including a rumor about a certain fondness for chocolate chip cookies. "I hope it's true, because I've got a batch hot out of the oven. I loved my first full day in Weathersby. It was like the platonic ideal of small-town Americana, like something I'd only ever seen in postcards and picture books. I was usually nervous around strange adults, but not here. Everyone was all smiles. They liked to congregate on the hill around the town's impressive church, and there, I made fast friends with a boy named Colin, who'd also been dragged here by his parents. We spent the day exploring the woods and pretended it was a Minecraft world, building little dirt houses and fighting imaginary creepers with sticks. Uncle Teddy's land was one of rolling hills where the wind whispered through the longer grass like fingers brushing hair. It was a horse ranch, and his farmhouse was positioned just right to give us a constant view of the beauty of the herd. "Rule number 1 out here," he explained as he gave us the tour, "is to never go out at night. Heck, just stay all nice and countsy in your room whenever the sun is down. Okay, Bud." "Why?" I asked. He paused. "Coyotes," he said. "They come out at night sometimes. They're not too bad or anything. But I just don't want you kids getting hurt, is all." Indeed, that night was the first time I noticed something strange about this town. But it was certainly no coyote. I was lying in my bedroom looking out at the horses in the field just behind the house. There were 10 mares to 1 stallion, whom Teddy liked to joke was the luckiest guy on earth. But something was off with him that night. All the others grazed. Not noticing I was watching, but he was staring right at me, matching my gaze. I shuddered, as if I'd been caught doing something wrong. Something about it gave me goosebumps. How absolutely still he was. How even his tail didn't sway in the wind. The way both of those eyes faced me directly, their gaze boring into my soul. I could tell something was wrong about that, but my child brain couldn't figure out what. In the end, I just closed the curtains and willed myself to sleep. The next morning I told Uncle Teddy about it, and he laughed. "That old boy, you must have been seeing things." He showed me to the stallion, who, in the daylight, looked like just a regular horse again, chomping on hay. "See how horses have their eyes on the sides of their heads? That's so they can see nasty wolves coming from any direction," he explained patiently. "To be looking right at you like that, they'd have to have been smack dab on the front of his face, like a predator. And this big boy isn't a predator, is he? He loves his carrots and oats." I giggled and agreed, and felt rather silly about the whole thing. Still, I kept my bedroom curtains closed every night from then on. After that, me and Colin set about the task kids were best see completely wasting a summer's day. At some point that afternoon, he asked if I'd seen the town graveyard. I told him yes. Of course, there was a modest one just down the hill from the church, a humble baker's Downson granite gravestones aligned in rows. He grinned. "No," he said smugly. "I meant the real graveyard." He led me far behind the church, to the single point furthest from civilization on the tiny island. What waited there was like no graveyard I'd ever seen. What must have been hundreds of rudimentary markers, made of sticks and antlers and mud and all the basic components of the woods, were interspersed between the trees without rhyme or reason, like a forest of their own. We only knew they were graves by the patches of discolored dirt at their base, and the fact some of the markers looked like crosses, though most were more esoteric symbols. Some of them looked old, very old. I wondered how on earth they could have remained standing. But then I noticed that no wind reached the graveyard, not even the slightest breeze. Pretty cool, right? I mean, what do you think they buried here? He asked. I don't think they're people graves. There's no way this many people lived here in this town's whole history. Besides, they're too small. He's right, I thought. No graves should be this small, not ever. For some reason, the thought sent a chill up my spine. I don't know, pets. Nah, that's lame, he laughed. I'm thinking aliens. Aliens? Well, Brian told me, Brian was here before you. He was cool. Well, he was the one who found this graveyard. But also, he snuck out of the house one night. Yeah, to find, a phone or something. I don't remember. And anyway, he saw this creature outside his house. Like, just kind of watching them. And he said it. He was talking too fast. And his words were getting tangled up in knots. Well, basically, the way he described it, I thought it had to be an alien. Nothing from Earth is that weird. I don't know. I shrugged sheepishly. I think Earth has lots of weird stuff on it. He ignored me and kept going. Anyway, I think that's what they do. When, UFOs fly over the town, they all get their guns and go shoot them down, and then they bury them right here in... What in the hell are you boys doing? Uncle Teddy's roar almost sent us jumping out of our skins. We turned around to see a man we almost didn't recognize. Eyes that seemed alight with fire. A face that seemed burned red. Hands balled up to fists. I'd never seen Teddy with anything less than a big, goofy grin. Now, he looked about ready to strangle us. We're so sorry. Uncle, we were just... Now, I want you to listen here, boy. I don't care who you are, nephew or not. I'll wring your neck out like a towel if I ever see you set foot here again. He was biting his lip, as if to quell a shouting fit. This here is sacred ground, boy. Sacred. Do you have any idea what that means? It was only after a few minutes of begging and crying that his expression finally began to soften, like water being dumped on a raging fire. We swore on our immortal souls we would never even glance in the graveyard's direction again for as long as we lived. Thus, with a painful slap to the back of our heads and a promise to tell our parents, Teddy silently led us home. I was woken late that night by the sound of the church bells, the din of them like a whip cracking in my skull. I tried to retreat right back into the safe realm of dreams. But in the silence, I slowly registered another sound, one much lower, more guttural. I cracked my eyes open just enough to see the vague silhouette of something tall and heavy-set, just behind the curtain of the window, faintly backlit by the pale moonlight. I could hear the snorting and breathing of a horse, but it sounded somehow sickly, as if it were struggling to push air around something stuck in its throat, something that shook and rattled against its vocal cords every time it tried to inhale. All I could do was cower under my blanket and convince myself it would protect me. I must have managed to sleep at some point, for in a moment it was morning, and the silhouette was gone. The next morning, Uncle Teddy took me and Colin out fishing on a john boat, just like Dad would do. He was back to his happy old self, and it was hard to believe this was the same man who'd threatened to wring out my neck the day before. Something about the way he talked made even the boring stuff sound interesting. He taught us about the cypress trees that seemed to reach up from the waters like the fingers of a drowning giant, and about this wasting disease that plagued every deer in the area. And moreover, he'd go into history and politics, and we were in awe, for this was the first time a grown-up had talked to us about these subjects as if we were equals. We didn't understand it all, of course, but we were fascinated all the same as he told us how he'd reacted to 9/11, the assassination of JFK, the world wars, until we started wondering how he could possibly be old enough to remember all that stuff. Every time we asked, he just laughed and flashed us a knowing smile. Have you ever read the Bible, boys? Not like hearing tidbits in Sunday school. I mean, read it with your own eyes, cover to cover, he eventually asked, and sucked his teeth when we shook our heads. Or, you weren't raised right. By the time I was your age, I'd memorized it front to back. It and the Quran, the Avesta, the Bhagavad Gita. And he started telling us Bible stories. We wanted to complain that we'd heard them all in Sunday school, but his were different. Everything was all twisted up when he told it, but he spoke with such absolute certainty and confidence that we almost believed him over the good book itself. It felt exciting, like we were being let in on secret truths no other grown-ups would tell us. He told us about how Abraham really did sacrifice his son at Moriah, how Job killed his own family to prove his devotion, how the Canaanites ceased their offerings to Moloch and began giving to God instead. But soon, we weren't having fun anymore. His voice was getting lower, more serious. The stories were getting more violent. The children had insulted one of God's prophets in Israel and thus insulted God himself. That means a death warrant from heaven itself, something that absolutely must be enacted under pain of perdition, he said. Elisha took them, all 42 of them, and drowned them in the river Jordan, one by one, held their heads under the water, but he took no joy in this. In fact, after his work was done, he fell to his knees and wept. But God came to him, cradled his cheek, wiped away his tears. "You are not evil, my son," he told him. "You are merely my hands here on earth." Something broke in his voice. His smile widened, but there was nothing soothing about it anymore. "Don't you see? Isn't it beautiful?" He was practically manic now, speaking faster and faster. Sometimes people need to do horrible things for higher purposes. It doesn't make them wrong. It doesn't make them evil. Who could possibly judge them for doing what's right? What happened to those children? It had to happen. Don't you see? Elisha was a good man. Being chosen by a higher power and doing your duty, it's a gift, not evil. You're still a good person. You understand that, don't you? Don't you? There was a long silence. Uncle Teddy looked back and forth between us, eyes puffy as if ready to cry. He seemed to scour every inch of our expressions for what? I think it was a hint of understanding, a sign we agreed with him, as if we could thereby absolve him of his guilt. But it never came. A certain darkness filled his eyes, and he turned away with a sigh. Not quite disappointment, more like resignation. "No, of course you don't." Uncle Teddy didn't speak another word the entire rest of the trip, just stared out into the waters until the boat shored itself all on its own. Afterwards, me and Colin went to lie together up on the hill, reading shapes into the clouds in some unspoken mutual agreement to forget what had just happened. Somehow, I drifted off to sleep upon that shaded hill, and when I awoke, Colin was gone, and the sun was setting. I was out after curfew. I crept back to the dimly lit farmhouse, expecting a reprimand. I found a much stranger sight instead. On one side of the kitchen island, all facing away from me, was Colin, flanked by Teddy and a woman I believed was his mother. My mom was across from them, facing me, and while she wasn't actively crying, her eyes looked red and raw. The atmosphere felt heavy, like this was something I wasn't supposed to see. So I retreated to my room and tried to distract myself. A few hours later, I heard the town's old church bells ringing through the night. I never saw Colin again after that, and no one even mentioned him. I told myself he just went home, but I never felt sure. The next morning, the first clouds hovered over Weathersby, the grey, monstrous type that rumbled like an approaching army, all looming blasphemies disgracing a sky that was supposed to be perfect and blue. The atmosphere of the town changed with it. Nobody was smiling anymore. The locals watched me from their windows and porches with faces of stone, whispering to each other. It felt like everyone was in on some big conspiracy of which only I had been excluded. Mom tried her best to act as though everything were okay, but every smile was a little faker than the last, and the way she threw herself into cooking and housework seemed increasingly desperate, as if she were trying to distract herself. I told her I wasn't having any fun anymore, begged to go back home, but she only stared at me, the exact same way my father had on that foggy morning. "Everything's going to be okay, baby." She laid a hand on my shoulder. "Why don't you go play with the other kids? Surely that will make you feel better." But they were all going through the same thing I was. I noticed there were fewer kids congregating on the hill around the church than I remembered from my first day. That was because, they explained, a number of them had gone home over the past couple nights, a hopeful euphemism for disappeared. I learned, also, that every single one of us had been dragged here by our parents, supposedly to visit extended family. Despite the wealth of middle-aged married couples, not a single kid in all of Weathersby was a local. I never saw a trace of Teddy all day. Well, I think I didn't. Once I was looking wistfully out into the forest down the hill, and I imagined that I could just start running and swimming and get far away from this place, and I saw something that prowled the bushes on all fours, nose to the ground as if tracing the scent of prey. Must be a coyote, I thought, just from the shape of it in the blurry distance. But there was something about the brief glimpses of its fur, thick and curly and muddy brown, that reminded me of the strands of Teddy's bushy beard. And for the rest of the day, lingering in the back of my mind, was the mental image of him crawling on his hands and knees, stalking the wilderness like an animal. Later, I passed by the horse fields on the way home and noticed them all look up to stare at me in almost perfect sync. It wasn't like the stallion had. That first night, with that statuesque stillness and both blank, empty eyes angled directly at me in impossible ways. They were all regular horses beneath the sunlight, and yet I was still unnerved by how they looked at me, patiently, expectantly. It was all maddening. Knowing something bad was about to happen, was happening, maybe unseen in the background, yet to have the day stretch out quietly, uneventfully. It made even the air seem thicker, harder to breathe. Every child has an innate sense like that, some ability to tell when darkness was looming in on the peripheries of their simple world, even if they couldn't understand it. I knew deep down that some terrible series of events had been set into motion, as irreversible and unstoppable as a runaway train, but I could not see its tracks. As the sun set, I sensed I did not have much longer left to wait. I'd prayed before, in a way, those rote sing-song prayers they made you memorize at Sunday school, but that night I'd ever truly prayed to God. The storm rolled in. It was unlike any I'd ever experienced. The raindrops sounded like millions of fists slamming against the roof, trying to get in, and the blare of the winds sounded almost human, like a wailing of despair that peaked and troughed in pitch and volume, but would never, ever end. The crash of thunder was like some cosmic blacksmith's hammer against the anvil of the earth, rattling the windows and leaving me shivering, veins pulsing with adrenaline. The house creaked and groaned all around me, as if it were about to come undone, be reduced to its constituent parts and scattered like an ant's nest beneath a garden hose. Almost worse than what I heard was what I didn't hear. The cacophony of the storm drowned all other sounds. I glanced to the window, wondering if the thing was once more standing just beyond that thin border. Hell, there could be an entire herd of them, surrounding the house, crawling over the roof, searching for any entry point. Those gasping, choking snorts concealed by the deluge. I Saturday in bed and strained my ears, listening. But would I be able to tell the difference between the pounding rain and the stomping of hooves? I sat awake all night staring at my window's curtain, analyzing it for any trace of the thing's silhouette. But there was no moon out tonight to backlight it. It could be pressing its face against the glass at that very moment, and I would have no way of knowing. Unless, of course, I pushed aside the curtain and looked. I crept forward. Even a single step towards that curtain caused my heart to rise in my chest. Every moment I expected something to smash through the glass and grab me in a wicked claw. I watched that linen curtain slowly sway in the ambient breeze. Maybe there was nothing on the other side. Maybe I'd pull the curtain aside, see only darkness, and finally feel safe enough to sleep. All I had to do was move a bit of fabric. It would be easy. So why did it feel so impossible? I raised a hand, but it was trembling so fiercely, like a rabid animal I could not control. It inched closer and closer, slowly, delicately. I grasped one edge of the curtain, and then a sound, not outside the window, down the hall, right outside my bedroom. Footsteps, stomping towards my door, like something nearing a full run. My heart felt like it jammed itself up in my throat. They found a way in, I thought. They used the window to distract me while they found a way in. I ran to barricade the door with a cupboard, but I was too late. The door slammed open hard enough to rattle the walls, and I shrunk before the mad creature staring at me from the darkness of the hall. Uncle Teddy. I could only barely recognize him. His shirt looked crusty and near solid with grime and effluence, like he'd accumulated a month's worth of filth in a single night. 2 eyes poked like burning coals out of a face caked with dirt and ash. His jet black hair and beard twisted and knotted and bedraggled and flowing out like a lion's mane. His smell was ungodly. He reminded me of a savage man from a primal era, astounded by the sight of fire. "Get your shoes on," he commanded in a tone that brooked no questioning. "We're leaving." I couldn't argue with him. In moments, we were in his pickup truck as he drove through town like a man who knew his time was almost out, taking the route by pure memory, I guessed, as it was impossible to see the road through that suffocating haze of rain and darkness. A bolt of lightning near enough to rattle my teeth pierced through the night, and for an instant illuminating the Gothic, looming edifice of the town's church. He slammed the brakes, jumped out of the car, dragged me brutally along by the wrist. This was my first time seeing the church from the inside, and I was baffled. There were no pulpits, no pews, only walls lined with shrines and fetishes and candles and statues of things that were no Christian figures I recognized, and a regal chair, almost throne-like, in the room's center. Teddy roughly shoved me onto the seat. "Just sit here and don't move from this room, kid," he begged breathlessly. "Just trust me, okay? You can trust your old Uncle Teddy. I've done right by you, haven't I? Please, please, don't make me stay here." Tears were rolling down my cheeks. "Why did you bring me here? I want to go home." The chair seemed equipped with some complex, elaborate set of restraints, but luckily, he had no time to fiddle with them. He kept looking towards the door, like he was afraid someone might walk in. I tried to stand, but he grabbed me by the shoulder and forced me back down. "I don't have time for this, you selfish little brat. Why can't you just shut up and do one little thing for your uncle?" "Stop. Stop it. You're hurting me." By now I was shouting, crying, squirming against his grip. His reaction came faster than my brain could register it. One hand grasped my throat, squeezing shut my windpipe, and suddenly in the other was the glint of a straight razor, slid from his sleeve with a magician's grace. He held it up so I could see my reflection in its shiny surface, and all the while, there was something in his eyes I'd never seen there before. "Sit right here or I'll kill your mother and your little sister. Do you understand? I'll take this and cut them up into little pieces and feed them to dogs. I'll make you watch every second. I'll make you help carve them up. Is that what you want? Is it?" I wanted to scream at him, to tell him I hated this imposter, that I wanted the real Teddy back, but my voice caught in my throat as a sob, and Teddy fled the building at a full sprint, like he'd just pulled the pin on a grenade. "Be a big boy," my mother's voice whispered in my head. It was what she always said to me when I was scared or sad. "Be a big boy." Those words pounded against the inside of my head like a heartbeat as I curled up in the chair, knees against my chest, and wept. I stayed put for as long as I could bear. My fear of Uncle Teddy battled with my fear of being alone in a macabre church during a wicked storm. I couldn't fight the oppressive feeling that the statues arranged along the various shrines were staring at me. The more I looked at the crooked figures, the less human they seemed. I know it sounds mad, but it almost felt like the walls were closing in around me, and they were all drawing nearer and nearer. All it took was the crash of lightning slamming down upon the building's spire to finally send me sprinting out the door. I was just in time. There, just down the road, came a mass of silhouettes, so close and so cohesive they looked like a black blob oozing along the pavement. I flung myself into the bushes across the road just moments before the ghastly procession was lit by the faint hints of moonlight. They strode with the robotic synchronization of a marching army, standing 3 abreast in orderly lines, some swaying jars of burning incense from chains, all moved in absolute silence. I couldn't even hear their footsteps beneath the din of the rain. I recognized the townsfolk by their figures and outfits. There was that sundress of the old lady down the street, and the overalls of the town's sole mechanic. but each was hiding their face beneath a black satin veil, like you'd see on a bride at the altar. Something about those veils terrified me most of all. Just looking at them, thinking of what might be underneath, I felt like there were firecrackers under my skin and hands gripping and squeezing my heart and lungs, and I had to desperately fight every nerve in my body screaming at me to run. Row by row, the figures vanished into the church, and the moment they were out of sight, that squeezing, burning, twisting feeling inside me subsided. I stood and ran, going nowhere, just blindly stumbling through the rain and praying to God I'd find a way out of this nightmare. That I'd wake up in bed to the smell of Uncle Teddy's fresh-baked cookies, and all of this would have been just a bad dream. Suddenly, I was blinded by headlights as a vehicle rounded the corner. I frowned in place, feeling something tugging within me. Was it someone who would help? Or was it Teddy? Or another of those townsfolk? In those horrible nightmare veils, I almost ran and hid. Thank God I didn't. I cannot describe my relief when I recognized my family's grey SUV, and my mom rushed out to hug me, tears in her eyes. Thank God, she whispered. Oh, thank God. She didn't ask me to explain where I'd been. It was like she already knew. Without a word, she dropped me into the back seat alongside Kathy, still groggy from being woken from her nap. As Mom tore down the road back to the bridge, we could hear the church bells ring one final time, the sound piercing even through the lightning and rain. As we left, we passed by the horse field. I covered my eyes with my hands, not daring to look. But Kathy looked, and I'll never forget her little gasp. Are the horsies sick? Mommy, what's wrong with the horsies? She asked. What's wrong with their faces? The moment we drove back over the bridge, the rain ceased and the clouds cleared, as if whatever had been holding us in the palm of its hand had finally relaxed its grip and let us go. None of us said a single word during the drive home. For years, all of this lingered in my memory only as abstract fragments, like I could remember the feeling of it, but not the substance. I always figured it was a half-remembered childhood nightmare, or something I saw on TV. Only a few weeks ago did the pieces all fall together again, all at once. Recently, my parents have passed away, and my sister moved abroad, so I was the one left with the old family home. With the economy the way it is, I got priced out of it real quick. I was packing everything up when, out of Mom's antique dresser, fell an old photo album, almost fallen to pieces. I figured a trip down memory lane would help cope with having to sacrifice my childhood home to the capricious gods of the real estate market. So I Saturday back and spent a few minutes giggling at old baby photos, oohing at vacations I'd forgotten we'd ever taken. And I frowned, just as I was about to turn a page. Somehow, deep in my heart, I knew he would be there, waiting for me. My heart rose into my throat. Something deep in my guts screamed at me to throw the book into the fire. I don't know how I worked up the courage to flip to the next page. My hand was shaking so much, I almost tore the corner off. There waited a full-page photo of me and my family and friends posing together at some local arcade for my 15th birthday. This would have been years after our trip to Uncle Teddy's, and I couldn't find a single trace of him at a glance. For a single, blissful moment, I convinced myself it had been nothing, just my overactive imagination at it again. And then I saw him, way off to the right, barely visible through the darkness of the night. He'd been watching us from outside the window. All I could see was his head, as if it alone protruded from the inky blackness. He had his face pressed right against the glass, breath fogging the window. He had a big grin on his face, staring right into the camera, as if taking part in our group photo. And above those rows of yellowed teeth were perfectly round eyes, brown and shifting like mud flowing in the rain around horizontal, rectangular pupils. I found several boxes of journals, notes, and other writings, all different authors with seemingly real stories or recollections. Here's one I transcribed to share with you all. Peekaboo, I see you. My eyes slowly opened, The soft and slightly sticky warmth of my modest one-bedroom apartment hung like an oppressive reminder that I, as an unemployed and nearly penniless tenant, couldn't afford to turn on my AC. I had fallen asleep in a slump against the old brown leather couch in the living room. Again. I groaned as my body shifted into place, stretching my legs and arms out, feeling them wake up as I did. July in Georgia was not forgiving, and it certainly took no prisoners. The hours I had whittled away, I spent largely just laying around, hoping my email notification would go off regarding a potential job offer. This cycle had been ongoing for about a week or two, and honestly, made time seem even more warped. My mind berated me. Was I doing enough? Should I be burning through my very nearly non-existent savings like this? I shouldn't be picky. I should just go get whatever job I can. Beggars can't be choosers, you know. Attempting to shake off the mental fog, I got up quickly from the couch, walked over the mini fridge against the adjacent wall, and took out an ice-cold soda. Placing the cold can against my head, I sighed, having momentary relief and trying to reassure myself that I was making the right decision. I deserve the right job. I have the experience. I have the skill set. I shouldn't settle. One of these opportunities will pan out. I know it. Feeling a renewed sense of vigor, I turned to my phone, charging on the table that sat beside the couch. I nabbed it up and looked as the screen to see the time, 4:37 p.m., and nothing else but my screensaver, some generic mountain range captured at dusk that always made me feel nostalgic for a place I'd never been. I let out another sigh, glanced around my sparse and warm living quarters, and thought about how to kill the rest of the day. That's when I heard it. Outside my apartment window, a lady's voice, fairly young, exuberant, happy, but slightly wrong. She spoke. "I see you. Peekaboo. I see you." It sounded like she was talking to kid, maybe even a baby. I was half tempted to pull back the curtain and scan the lawn to see, but I thought, if she was there and some weird dude starts staring at her, well, that'd be awkward. I'm not overly familiar with my neighbors in the apartments across the way, but I'd never seen a kid or baby, and I'd never heard a voice like this before. To a normal person, you'd think, why is a lady talking to a baby weird? And you know, I'd agree with you. But I'd spent too much time indoors with naught but my own mind to keep me company. And I'm sure you can guess that leads to heightened anxiety. Christopher, get a fucking hold of yourself, dude. You've spent too many days sitting in this apartment moping around that now some lady talking to a baby has you freaked out. I let out a chuckle at myself for being so stupid. What a dumbass. I cracked the soda open and took big gulp, letting the carbonation and sugar simultaneously burn and soothe my throat. I let a hearty and likely annoying "ah" afterwards, and to my own amusement. I finished the soda in another 2 gulps, walked over the trash can situated near the sink, and chucked it in. Walking back into the living room, I noticed there was no longer any game of peekaboo being cooed outside my window, and all had returned to its normal and uninteresting silence. With this, I turned my attention back to the phone, deciding I would manually check my emails. Sometimes notifications don't always work as intended, and I was desperate for some sign of forward momentum. As I placed my finger over the email icon on my home screen, the exuberant, joyful, and even more warped voice rang out again. "I see you! Peekaboo! I see you!" This time it wasn't coming from behind me, beyond the curtained window. It was coming from my porch, right behind my front door. I stared in confusion in its direction. What in fuck? I could feel anxiety, anxious energy surge through my body. My mind wasn't sure how to process the voice or what was happening. Why is the voice at my door? Why does it sound like that? I tried to quickly rationalize it. Maybe she's waiting for her friend across the way. The Carolwoods, I think. Maybe she's friends or family, and it's hot, and she's got her baby and is trying to keep him calm or entertained. My brain was rooting around trying to red yarn its way to some conclusion that made that voice, that was now just past my front door, less out of place, less strange. Get your act together. Then it hit me. I'm dramatizing a situation because I'm bored and not being productive. Of course. Duh. I chuckled again at my own stupidity. I'm going to go to my room and watch TV. The fan blows better in there anyways, and I'll be away from this lady's annoying blabbering. I'm not scared. I'm just annoyed. I lied to make myself feel less like a wuss who was evading a strange scenario, and more like someone who was choosing to avoid an obnoxious situation. I sat up and quickly walked down the hall, the lady's discordant, joyful and robotic "I see you" fading. Upon entering my modest room, which housed a bed, a sofa chair, a small closest and smaller bathroom, I shut the door and, out some animal-born sense of security, locked it. I plopped down in the sofa chair and quickly booted up my TV and launched Netflix. I was paranoid about nothing, I knew that, but stranger things have happened and I wasn't going to assume I was safe. Despite not being able to hear the lady any longer, I cranked the volume over my usual listening threshold. I sat back and began to watch a documentary on panda preservation. Before I knew it, my eyes had grown heavy, and my body and mind had given themselves over to sleep yet again. Sometime later, I jolted awake, the room dark and TV off due to its power save settings. What had woken me was the soft pulsating of the phone in my hand vibrating. The caller ID read Mom. I stared at it, half out of grogginess and half out of cowardice. Do I want to talk to her? Or, as it usually goes with my mother, be talked at by her? I decided against answering. I was already feeling annoyed at myself enough. I didn't need a good old dogpiling from my mother to top it off. Plus I had to pee. God, did I have to pee. I got up and hustled the few short steps into the connected bathroom, flicked on the light, and as I was about to unbuckle my pants, from past the door to my bedroom came that voice, the lady's voice, joyful, sweet, energetic, loud, and very, very wrong. I see you. Peekaboo, I see you. There was no denying it now. This voice sounded human, but it wasn't. It was slightly warped, as if the edges of it were bending, warping, as if the mouth forming them was too misshapen to form them right, as if the voice projecting them was doing its best to mock it. My mind raced. This seemed unbelievable. What in absolute fuck was less than 3 feet away, inside my apartment? Why was it doing this to me? I blinked hard and gathered what little resolve I had. It didn't matter what or why this was happening. It just was. And I could safely conclude that whatever it was intending to scare or, worse, hurt me. I had my phone. I could call 911. That was step 1. Step 2, I had a baseball bat in my closet. I could grab that and ready myself. Step 3, I had a small window that dropped down into the courtyard. I was on the 2nd floor, but I could manage the jump. I think. That's all I could think to do. With all the bluster and bravado I could muster, I quickly moved to the sofa chair, grabbed my phone, and made to my open closest, grabbing the bat, all in a few swift movements. All the while the lady was cooing the same phrase over and over again, on a loop, not more than 5 feet away. I wrestled with the lock on my bedroom window. It wasn't playing nice. I don't think I'd ever opened it in the 4 years I'd lived here, and it obviously hadn't been opened long before then. After struggling with the latch for what felt like an eternity, it gave way, and I then proceeded to press up on the window. Luckily, it went flying up without much resistance, and as I pushed it up, it made a hard slamming sound. And as if on cue, when that happened, the lady outside the door chanting stopped on a dime. It was dead silent. The only discernible sound was my breathing, the night air flowing in and bringing with it the sounds, crickets and cicadas. I sat by the open window, wide-eyed, staring directly into the dinky lit room and laser-focused on the bedroom door. From underneath the doorframe, an impossibly long arm silently began to stretch up, skin pale, almost blue in the light, vascular, the fingers, long, bony and dressed in rings against their bulging knuckles. The fingernails longer still and adorned in a crimson polish that almost seemed to glow in the drearily lit bedroom. The impossibly long arm effortlessly stretched until its index finger effortlessly touched the lock on the doorknob, and as if waiting just a beat to heighten the tension, it clicked the lock. The door was now unlocked. This lady could swing the door open, and whatever it was could cross the threshold into the room and come for me. I had to jump. The risk of breaking my legs be damned. I didn't want to see what ghoulish visage that arm belonged to. I steeled my nerves and jumped the 12 or so feet to grass courtyard below. I landed with a hard thud, but didn't lose my balance. My adrenaline rushing, I made a hasty dash toward the center of my small complex, my legs firing like pistons. I gunned it to nearest light source, which happened to be a small gazebo. Then my flight or fight response loosened enough for me to think, I gotta call the fucking cops. As I approached the small structure, which was bathed in a harsh and singular white light, I pivoted to look back at my apartment window. No hand, no creature, nothing, just an open window. But what would I expect to see? Some ghoulish haunt leering out at me from that darkened opening, some unholy visage, all teeth and elongated appendages coaxing me back in. What was going on with me? Was I having some sort of breakdown? Had the stress and loneliness gotten to me? That was certainly a better explanation than what I was thinking was happening, right? I sighed, plopped down hard on the only bench housed under the gazebo and unlocked my phone. I had a notification, an email. I knew, no matter, now wasn't the time. I needed to call the cops. I needed to make sure my apartment was clear, and if I was having a mental breakdown, I could get help. I needed this, whatever the fuck it was, to be over. But you know that often unseen hand that guides us to make the most inane decisions at just the wrong moment. Yeah, that one. That force propelled me to click on the email notification. God damn it, I wish I hadn't. It took me to a video. The video was dark, quiet, as if nothing was even playing. But then, a loud static, and the sound of hands fumbling around as the frame was jilted and shook. And then, as if lit with a small and barely effectual flashlight, a mouth plastered with a wry grin appeared. But, as with the voice, it was wrong. It was too wide, with far too many small teeth. The lips were thin and smeared with crimson lipstick, the same shade as fingernails I'd seen just minutes ago. Then it began to move, to talk. I see you. Peekaboo, I see you. I felt my body flush with fear, confusion, anger. What the fuck? Washington S. Happening. I tried to exit out. I tried shutting my phone's power off. Nothing was working. I instinctively and forcefully dropped my phone. The mantra was on a disturbing repeat. The lady's joyous and warped voice a disgusting lullaby I had to get away from. Whatever ungodly force had decided to visit me was breaking the bounds of any reality I understood. Neighbors, my mind yelled at me. Go to the Carolwoods, ask to use their phone, call 911. Figure this shit out. Go. I spurred myself into action, running out from beneath the gazebo and toward the other two-story apartment complex that directly faced mine. Navigating the dimly lit walkway up to their door, I didn't have concern for etiquette or what time it was. I was in pure self-preservation mode. I knocked on their door as loudly I could. Fuck, what's the wife's name? Denise. Desiree. Something with a D. I simultaneously scolded myself whilst trying to recall the woman's name. Her husband, who I had only met once in passing, was a complete unknown. Before I could deliberate any further, a porch light popped on and a voice from behind the door wavered out at me. It was a man, the aforementioned husband. Who? What the hell do you want? I am so sorry to bother you, Mr. Carrollwood, but someone broke into my house and I don't have my cell and I'm worried and I need to call the cops. I live across the way in Unit 17. He cut me off. Yeah, Christian, right, he said, his tone less unsure and worried and now more curious and annoyed. Christopher, I responded back hurriedly while throwing another glance at my apartment unit. Another voice, quieter, came out from behind the door. A woman. Christopher. Honey. Yes, you sound scared. Let's get you some help. Thank God. Buddha. Shiva. Elvis. Who the fuck ever? I sighed. I felt a wave of uncertain hope wash over me. The door unlatched and swung open to reveal a dark opening, one that seemed stretched in a void. There was no one there. No Mr. Carrollwood. No Miss Carrollwood. Just a dark hallway and a voice that loudly reached from just beyond its bounds. I see you. Peekaboo. I see you, Christopher. As quickly as I had felt hope, I felt my body give itself over to absolute terror. I spun around and attempted to run, but that long, pale blue arm, the one with its nails adorned in a bright, glowing crimson polish, had wrapped its unnatural fingers all the way around my calf. I fell hard on the "We're glad you're here" welcome mat that decorated the front porch of the Carrollwoods. I managed to turn my body around to see that the arm was pulling me into the void. I couldn't see the creature it was attached to, and I didn't want to. I need to fight. I get loose. But I was being dragged by a force so strong, any attempt I made to swing my bat or kick was met with pure indifference. Holy shit. This is it, my mind raced. My heart thrashed inside my chest so hard. I felt like I'd have a heart attack, or worse, fear. I swung the bat. I yelled. I cursed. It was no use. I was being drawn into the maw of this entity. This being. This thing. I had shut my eyes and waited to die. I stopped moving. I didn't feel the hand upon my leg anymore. I felt warm. I jolted awake. I was in my apartment, the sticky heaviness of the room just as it had been hours before. The golden light from the afternoon poured in through what cracks it could. What the fuck, I thought. Did I just dream that shit? As I straightened my stiff and slightly achy body up and coming to grips with absolute déjà vu, a voice rang out from down the hall. This time, slow, loud, and just past the threshold of my sight. Peekaboo. I see you. It's been a year since Gramps died, and the lease on his storage unit was finally up. Me and Mom went to take care of things there, going through the various items, picking what was good to keep and what was garbage Gramps kept, a lot of old photo albums, and various relics. The guy was old, and he had a mountain of stuff to prove he'd been here a while. We were sorting for days, filling up a trailer, and bringing it back to our homes. There was so much crap we had to split it between my place and Mum's. Near the end, we started saying hell with it. The storage unit was hot out here in the southeast summers, so an unconditioned metal box was like sorting boxes in an Amazon warehouse in hell, not to mention how much the trailer was starting to cost. So we stopped going through it and just tossed everything in, unloading it in my spare room where we could sort through it without melting in the unbearable heat. Gramps was in the Navy. I knew that because he bragged about it all the damn time. So coming across some medals or files from his time wasn't surprising. Seeing one labeled top secret was definitely a turn though, because as far as we knew, he was just a torpedo technician on the submarines. Most of his war stories were about partying on various subs or aircraft carriers. We have a plaque and everything with his service record, commendations, and all kinds of crap. He served from 1955 until nearly 2005, and has all the awards to prove it. So color me surprised when I found a box labeled Operation Faultline 1954, a whole 3 years before his enlistment date. I called Mom to make sure I was right too before I even started going through the box, and she confirmed it was 1955, so I figured he had just gotten some old records or something. I wish I had left the lid on the box at this point. That must be how Pandora felt. Inside were filings full of papers, typed out records for whatever Operation Faultline was. They were all in fantastic condition at least, with no water damage or anything, which was a miracle considering how damp and hot it is in this godforsaken town. I started flicking through the pages, skimming as I went. Location Coggins, South Carolina. Mission statement: to research and develop new means of aquatic and amphibious warfare by unconventional or natural means. Commanding Officer: Daniel S. Serms, Captain of USS Ghost Current. I kept flipping through looking for what the actual operation was, hoping to find at least a summary at the bottom of the massive stacks of papers. Nothing in the main file but a load of military and bureaucrat jargon, which I've tried to read multiple times since, but it just hurts my head. Here are the bullet points for what I found, though, just to make it easy. The plan involved submarines with special prototype torpedoes. These were equipped with some sort of special payload that made a massive vacuum wherever it hit, essentially creating such a high impact against anything it hit that there was a big enough explosion to both drive away all the water, yet suck all the air from the massive area it happens. That's as best as I can explain the science jargon behind it. To be honest, I'm a copy editor. Science was never my thing, much less the deep ocean. Anyway, they used these vacuum torpedoes to try and create natural ocean phenomena, a sort of environmental warfare at sea. Except it was done with the intent of creating potential tsunamis to terrorize enemy populations into surrendering. This was prompted as a response to the long-term devastation of a nuke, as opposed to a natural disaster. Then it gave the United States an alibi to go in under the guise of aid and slowly insert themselves into the country. Sounds familiar? Right. The real discovery in there was a journal from Gramps himself. The damn thing was full of scribbles, writing in the margins and everything, wherever he could. Strange symbols took up some pages, while others were just full of what looked like another language. Transcribing his handwriting was a pain in the ass, but I think I finally got it all. Turns out, Gramps enlisted at 18, not at 19 like he told us. Now, I honestly see why he doesn't want to remember that year, if he did at all. His transcriptions are below, though I've cut out some of the more undecipherable ones, that way it makes sense. October 16th, 1954. I'm shipping out for the first time. Can't believe it finally happened. Getting my orders and shipping out after boot camp seemed like it was going to take forever. Now I'm at Camp Pikeram. This place is small though, and that's really something with where I'm coming from. The little island here just has the Navy base really, but there are a few stores and a little school just outside the main gates that keep things interesting. Not too many bars, though Anna told me I'm better off for that. I don't know why she's so nervous. Not like I'm going to meet someone prettier than her out here. I'm starting out as a torpedo technician's apprentice, and apparently it's one of the best jobs on the subs. All I have to do is make sure the torpedo tubes are clean and working, then load them in whenever we need to fire. Apparently after a few trips I can start taking over on the scope and aiming. I know Dad wasn't really for me joining up after everything, but I think the submarines are going to be much safer now than they were 10 years ago. All right. I've got to go to my first briefing in a few minutes. Orientation stuff, all that. Fingers crossed we get some interesting orders soon. October 26th, 1954. Wow, wasn't expecting to get them that fast. I've been stuck doing a lot of grunt work around the base, but that's typical for new recruits from what we've been told. The guys in our unit are all nice guys. We're getting along fine at least. The command are a little more on edge than the newest of us here. No idea why though. We've had some free time, and the beaches around here are pretty nice. Doesn't hurt that they're barely 10 minutes walk from anywhere on the base, so we can get out there whenever we want to. Anyway, new orders are that the sub is going to look out in the Atlantic near some fault line. Something about researching the natural terrain to detect earthquakes and tsunamis early. I don't know. Not really the things I expected from signing up with the Navy. We're shipping out early tomorrow morning. Supposed to be a 10-day trip. This will be our first time really going down in a sub, so hopefully nobody gets some weird case of the crazies down there. I don't think I'll get to do much, but it'll be nice to get a feel for the waters out there. It looks like a storm might be rolling in tonight, and the captain told us to make sure we have everything set before daybreak so we can get in and get out quickly. I'm turning in early. Oh. October 30th, 1954. It's been a long 3 days on the boat, and I'm just sitting down to sleep for the first time in at least 2 days. Things haven't gone well. We arrived at the fault line early this morning and started the survey nearly immediately. It's dark down here, really dark, like nothing I've ever seen, and cloudy nights out in the rural south get damn dark. This was different though, like it was trying to get inside the sub with us, snuff out any light it could find in here. It's cold too, even with the close quarters and machinery of the sub. Something happened when we started the survey though. I was able to look from one of the ports and see the fault line, where it started at least. It was hard to make out, even with the bright light they were shining on it. That thing was bright too, like the beam from a lighthouse under the water. We noticed when it turned on that a lot of things suddenly darted away in the water. Guess the things down here ain't too fond of the light. The fault was thin when it started out, but as we moved along it grew much, much wider. The light was shining deep down by now, but it still couldn't cut through the darkness deep in the line. Every now and then, we caught a glimpse of some deep-sea fish or another, each one uglier than the last with bulging eyes and sharp teeth. Looked like nightmares in the light, but they never stayed long, retreating back to the shadows quickly like vampires. Around 10 minutes in, we had to shut off our light because it started to overheat. Doesn't sound like something that could happen with as cold as it was. But that's why I just cleaned the torpedo tubes, I guess. Think it was Nadler that first saw it out of his port. The light had been off for a few minutes, and the darkness outside was trying to get in again. Then suddenly, a dim light started shining through the port on his side. It started getting brighter and brighter, rising up toward the entire sub. None of us could tell what it was. But there was something like a sun rising up from the fault line. The shadows around it rose up. Fleeing from the light and fish came swarming out of the cave down there in front. Command wasn't saying a damned thing as the light rose up. Dorsey, one of the older guys on the ship, says it's not like them to be quiet about something like this, especially with the threat the Russians are posing right now. There's no way we can be sure that's not some weapon they planted there. Our lead torpedo tech, Hansen, grabbed me then. He pulled me away from the ports and back over to the torpedo tube, telling me how we had to load one quick. I went toward the torpedo rack when he stopped me, opening a small compartment underneath us full of red torpedoes. These didn't look like any I had seen before, with odd markings all over them. I didn't question it. Loading it in with him and making all the preparations to fire, Command was screaming orders back at us through the tube, telling us to fire now. And finally Hansen hit the eject button after sealing the tube, sending a massive burst of smoke into our small compartment as it blasted out. I ran out of the torpedo compartment just to find half the boys collapsed in the throughway. Most of them were knocked out cold, some twitching, some foaming at the mouth. I couldn't do anything but stumble through toward the bridge trying to find out what was going on. The one thing I did notice was that bright light coming through every port I passed. Then it veered off like it was going back down the fault line. All I saw as it swam by was a couple of tentacles trailing behind the light, covered in sharp spines or pins. They definitely didn't look friendly. When I got to the bridge, Command seemed a little surprised to see me. They weren't too concerned about the bodies in the throughway though. Said they just got a case of hypoxia from the quick rise to the surface we had to make. Everyone came back awake a few minutes later, but something just wasn't right about them. After we got back to the base, they dismissed everyone to medical, with no word on why. We all went through some extensive stuff, but it was all mental. They were constantly questioning our psychological state, asking us what we saw. Are we sure of what we saw? Things like that. I just had to tell them I didn't see anything. But the other guys were apparently scarred by whatever it was. November 2nd, 1954. It's been a whirlwind couple of days in the barracks. Lots of people in and out with doctors and some head shrinkers coming in to talk to everyone. I can't get any damn answers from anyone about what went on. A fault line survey turning into a total meltdown for half a submarine just don't sound like something normal. I tried asking Dorsey about it when we finally got a few minutes alone. He thought it was something the Soviets might have come up with. What that paranoid son of a bitch said shook me to my goddamn core. He thought everything was some new plan by the Reds to take us out. But whatever he saw outside that port was different. He said the light was just some kind of lure, like the bait we would use for a fish on a hook. Whatever was trying to lure us in wasn't of this world. According to him, said it was like one of those pulp novel monsters that you see at drugstore counters. Some real Jules Verne nightmare stuff. Apparently the thing came back up a little bit after I laid down in my bunk. The whole thing glowing this green-purple color. Dorsey said it was brighter than anything he had seen, right down here in all the dark. When I asked him what it looked like, he said it reminded him of a squid he found off the coast of Japan a few years ago. The thing was bathing in radiation wash off from one of the bombs, and he said it was bigger than a steam engine with cars attached to it. This thing was even bigger, apparently, because Dorsey told me it could have easily swallowed the ship if it wanted to. The most terrifying thing about it, he said, was that it was covered in teeth. The spines I thought I was seeing were just the tentacles of it, and the rest of it was covered in even larger, more vicious hooked points. Dorsey says the thing came up, one monstrous eye showing from the middle of a gaping maw, tentacles splayed out, ready to devour the sub before we got that torpedo loaded up. Dorsey was off the coast of Japan when they dropped the nukes. He doesn't shake easily. This thing must have been terrifying. From what Dorsey told me, he saw something when he looked at it. Like a vision or some dream, I guess. He wouldn't really talk about the contents of it, but it got to him. November 2nd, 1954. Dorsey started screaming in his sleep tonight. The barracks were mostly quiet, half the guys being kept in the psych ward. He was just kind of whimpering at first, no real words or anything. Then he starts screaming, talking about how we poked something, said the thing was going to lay waste to all on the surface, that our minds and souls were forfeit for going down there. He wasn't making any damn sense. Sometime by the end of the ranting and talk of more bloodshed and hell, he started to get up and go through his trunk. We were just transfixed by what he was doing. It was nothing for him to have some angry rant about one thing or another, whether it be the Reds or the commissary food. This was foaming at the mouth, though. Absolute madness. Nadler tried to give him a tap on the shoulder and bring him back, but Dorsey just shoved him off and kept going through his trunk. He finally found what he was looking for too. An old pistol, dulled and scratched from time in war, was gripped in his hand now. Dors turned back to us, talking about how we were all damned now that we saw it. Said our souls belonged to that thing now, for a fate worse than hell itself. Then he looked right at me and said some words that will haunt me for the rest of my goddamn life. What's the point in living if I know what I'm in for after? The next thing that came out of his mouth was smoke after he put the gun in and pulled the trigger. First time I saw the insides of a person, splattered all over the bunker ceiling. November 4th, 1954. I found Nadler hanging from one of the shower heads in the bathroom today. He was gone before I got there. There wasn't any sign of his state, except for being a little more quiet than normal. Nadler left a message too, though, scrawled on a little note he was clutching. If you're smart, you'll follow me. November 10th, 1954. The incident here never happened. That's the official report anyway. The boys who were looking outside during the survey, they've all dropped like flies over the past week. There's nothing to say they were ever there. Just a folded flag sent to the family and some words of a diving accident. Don't think they even got the bodies back. But not sure where they ended up. I've been told that I'm being released on a medical leave until February, and apparently that's my official enlistment now. Swear they've poked and prodded me to hell and back already. But apparently I haven't had any irregularities found like the others. From what upper command is telling me, I'll start out in February 2 ranks higher, so at least I get something out of all this. For now, I'm heading out tomorrow, going back home for a while before my time starts again. I'll probably never know what happened, but I'm going to do my best to forget about all this. December 10th, 1954. I started having dreams. Whatever the thing was down there, it's talking to me. I think that's it, at least. I don't know anymore. The dreams are nothing but the black abyss. Nothing around except that pale, glowing light that starts coming up from the fault. I always wake up before it gets to me. But the voice that whispers at me says awful things. It tells me to kill, and use the bodies. It wants me to make a shrine to it, to help it come here. It's loud. I keep telling myself it's a dream. I'm going to go see the doctors when I get back in February. That's it. That's all there was in the journal other than the scribbles, which fill up most of the last half. I'm still not sure what the hell he saw down there, but after he went back, things must have been fine. Maybe he found some way to lock it all away somewhere. But part of me wonders about what the hell could have been down there. Gramps never said anything about stuff like this, and always told us the strangest thing he saw was a ghost ship drifting by empty one day. It's all just confusing. After all that, hopefully, he's able to just rest in peace, somewhere with Grandma and their family. Hopefully not in whatever twisted hell this thing came from. I'm going to leave the journal be, though. I've watched enough horror movies to know that's a recipe for a bad time. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.